She took her own life, but what she saw after wasn't darkness. You didn't arrive here by chance. Something deeper brought you. There are moments when the pain becomes so overwhelming that darkness feels like the only doorway left. When the weight of existence presses down so heavily that ending it all seems like the most compassionate thing you could do for yourself and everyone around you. Sarah Chen thought she understood darkness completely when she made that decision on a cold February night in 2019. She thought she knew what came after. But what happened in those 14 minutes when her heart stopped beating shattered everything she believed about endings, about punishment, about the nature of consciousness itself. When the paramedics brought her back, she didn't return as the same broken woman who had swallowed those pills. She came back carrying memories of a journey that most people never take and return to tell about. A journey into what Tibetan Buddhists call the bardo, the space between worlds, where souls encounter the deepest truths about why we're here and what our suffering really means. What she saw wasn't the darkness she expected, wasn't the end she had sought, wasn't even the judgment she feared. Instead, she found herself face to face with a love so vast and unconditional that it rewrote her understanding of her own worth, her purpose, and the sacred nature of even the most unbearable pain. Let me tell you what really happened. Sarah had been planning her death for 3 months. Not impulsively, not in a moment of crisis, but with the methodical precision of someone who had exhausted every other option and could no longer see a way forward. At 28, she had already survived childhood trauma that would have broken most people, fought through years of depression that felt like drowning in black water, and endured a series of losses that seemed designed by a cruel universe to test exactly how much one human heart could bear. The final blow came when her younger brother Michael, the only family member she still felt connected to, died in a car accident just 2 weeks after entering rehab for the 3rd time. Sarah had been his lifeline, his reason to keep trying, and when the call came from the hospital, something inside her simply gave up. She felt responsible, guilty, convinced that if she had been a better sister, if she had fought harder for him, if she had said different words or made different choices, he would still be alive. The Buddha taught in the Dhammapada that all things arise from mind. When the mind is overwhelmed by suffering, all of life appears as suffering. Sarah's mind had become a prison where every memory was evidence of her failures. Every future possibility looked grey and hopeless, and every moment of consciousness felt like a punishment she no longer deserved. On that February night, she wrote letters to the few people who would miss her, explaining that this wasn't their fault, that some people are just too broken to be fixed, that the world would be better without the burden of her pain. She took the pills with a glass of wine and lay down on her bed, expecting to drift into a sleep that would never end. But 14 minutes after her heart stopped, something impossible happened. Sarah found herself standing in what looked like a vast library, but the books were made of light, and the shelves stretched infinitely in all directions. The air shimmered with a presence that felt more real than anything she had ever experienced in physical life, and she could hear something like music, but it was the sound of pure love vibrating through space itself. "You're not supposed to be here yet," said a voice behind her, and when she turned, she saw a being of such radiant compassion that looking at them was like seeing the sun with your heart instead of your eyes. They didn't look human exactly, but their presence felt familiar, like coming home to someone you had loved for lifetimes but temporarily forgotten. "I don't want to go back," Sarah whispered, and for the first time in years, she wasn't crying. The pain that had lived in her chest like a physical weight was completely gone, replaced by a peace so profound it made her former life seem like a bad dream. "I know," the being said, their voice containing multitudes of understanding, "but you have work to finish, not punishment work, not suffering work, but the work of love. Would you like to see what you came to do?" Before Sarah could answer, the library around them transformed into something that looked like a movie theater, but instead of a screen, there was a living window into time itself. She saw her life from a completely different perspective, not as a series of traumas and failures, but as a carefully chosen curriculum designed to develop specific qualities of compassion and strength. She watched herself as a child, absorbing the dysfunction of her family not as an innocent victim, but as a soul who had volunteered to understand how deep pain transforms into wisdom. She saw her struggles with depression not as evidence of her weakness, but as a spiritual initiation that would allow her to recognize and heal the same darkness in others. She saw Michael's death not as the final proof of her inadequacy, but as the catalyst that would eventually awaken her to her true purpose. Every soul chooses their lessons before incarnating, the being explained, and somehow Sarah knew this wasn't metaphor but literal truth. You didn't choose your specific traumas, but you chose the general curriculum. Learning how to find light in the deepest darkness, how to transform poison into medicine, how to become someone who could guide others out of the same hell you've walked through. The vision expanded, and Sarah saw threads of light connecting her to hundreds of people she hadn't met yet, people who would need exactly the kind of understanding that only comes from surviving what seems unsurvivable. She saw herself in a future where her scars had become qualifications, where her breakdown had become her breakthrough, where her intimate knowledge of despair had transformed into an ability to offer hope to those who had lost all hope. "But the pain," she said, and even in this place of perfect peace, the memory of her suffering made her tremble. How can pain that intense serve any good purpose? The being smiled with such tenderness that Sarah felt held in a way she had never been held in physical life. Pain is not the opposite of love. Indifference is. Pain is love that has encountered resistance, love that has been temporarily forgotten, love that is fighting to remember itself. Your pain has been so intense because your capacity for love is so vast. The depth of your wounds will become the depth of your healing power. As they spoke, Sarah began to understand something that her traumatized mind had never been able to grasp. That consciousness survives death not as punishment or reward, but as continuation. That every soul is on a journey of awakening that spans multiple lifetimes, and sometimes the most difficult incarnations are chosen by the bravest souls who want to accelerate their growth and their ability to serve others. "I'm not ready," she whispered. But even as she said it, she could feel something changing inside her. The absolute despair that had driven her to those pills was transforming into something else. Not happiness exactly, but purpose. A sense that her life, no matter how painful, was part of something meaningful and necessary. "You're never ready," the being said gently. "But you're always capable. And you won't be going back alone. The love you've experienced here, the understanding you've gained, it's yours to keep. It will live in your heart as a compass, guiding you toward the work you came to do. The library began to fade, and Sarah felt herself being pulled back toward her body, but the panic she expected didn't come. Instead, she felt like she was carrying a treasure, the absolute certainty that consciousness is eternal, that love is the fundamental force of existence, and that even the darkest suffering serves a purpose in the grand curriculum of the soul. She woke up in the ICU with a breathing tube down her throat and her stomach pumped clean, but for the first time in her adult life, she felt genuinely grateful to be alive. In Tibetan Buddhism, the bardo is described as the intermediate state between death and rebirth, a realm where consciousness encounters the clear light of its own true nature without the filters of personality and trauma. But there are also bardos within life, moments when the ordinary world falls away and we glimpse the deeper reality that underlies all experience. Sarah's journey into clinical death was a bardo experience that revealed truths about consciousness, purpose, and the sacred nature of even our most difficult incarnations. The Buddha taught that suffering has a cause, and that the cause can be understood and transcended. But what Sarah learned in that space between worlds was that sometimes suffering is not something to be eliminated, but something to be transformed, transmuted from poison into medicine, from wound into wisdom, from personal agony into universal compassion. Western psychology focuses on healing trauma so we can return to normal functioning, but ancient wisdom traditions understand that some people incarnate specifically to experience the extremes of human suffering so they can become bridges for others who are lost in similar darkness. The shamanic traditions call these people wounded healers, those who must descend into their own underworld and return with medicine for the tribe. Sarah's near-death experience revealed what mystics across cultures have always known, that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but merely channeled through it, that love is not an emotion, but the fundamental structure of reality, and that what we call death is actually a doorway into expanded awareness. Her suicidal despair had been based on the assumption that ending her physical existence would end her pain. But what she discovered was that consciousness continues, and the lessons we're here to learn don't disappear just because we leave our bodies. The most profound part of her vision was understanding that souls choose their incarnations based on what they want to learn and how they want to serve. This doesn't mean we choose our specific traumas or that victims are somehow responsible for their suffering. It means that on the deepest level, every soul is here by choice, participating in a vast curriculum of awakening that serves not just individual growth, but the evolution of consciousness itself. The being of light who spoke with Sarah wasn't a religious figure or divine judge, but what spiritual teachers might call her higher self, the aspect of her consciousness that remains connected to universal love, even when her personality is drowning in despair. The work she came to do isn't a job or mission imposed from outside, but the natural expression of her soul's deepest nature once the temporary veils of trauma and conditioning are removed. Have you ever wondered why some souls seem to carry more pain than others, as if they volunteered for the most difficult assignments? Do you believe it's possible that our deepest wounds might also be our greatest qualifications to help others heal from similar suffering? Sarah didn't return from her near-death experience magically cured of depression or instantly free from the trauma that had shaped her life. But she came back with something that made all the difference: the unshakable knowing that her life had meaning, that her pain served a purpose, and that she was deeply loved by the universe, even in her darkest moments. 6 months later, she began volunteering at a crisis hotline, and within a year, she had started a support group for people who had lost siblings to addiction and suicide. Her intimate knowledge of despair, combined with her direct experience of the love that exists beyond the veil of ordinary consciousness, made her uniquely qualified to sit with others in their darkest hours and offer something more powerful than hope. The certainty that they were not alone, that their pain mattered, and that there was work for them to do that only they could accomplish. The scars from her suicide attempt became conversation starters, not symbols of shame. Her history of trauma became credentials, not disqualifications. Her familiarity with the darkest regions of human consciousness became her greatest gift to a world full of people who needed someone who truly understood what it meant to want to die and what it took to choose life again. If this story found you in a moment when you needed to hear it, please know that this isn't coincidence. Leave a word in the comments, even just "Comp hope," so others who are struggling can see they're not alone in this journey. And if you're carrying pain so heavy that ending it all seems like relief, I want you to know what Sarah learned in that space between worlds. Your consciousness is eternal, your suffering has meaning, and there is work for you to do here that only you can accomplish. The depth of your wounds is the measure of your capacity for healing, both your own and others. Subscribe if you'd like to explore more stories of transformation through the darkest passages of human experience. Share this if you know someone who needs to remember that love is stronger than death, purpose is stronger than pain, and the light that exists at the core of consciousness can never be extinguished, no matter how dark the night becomes. Let's build a space of compassion and truth together. The darkness you're walking through isn't your destination. It's your qualification. And the world needs what you're becoming on the other side of this night.